Remember to download both the BarnBurner and Zingo TV apps in the respective app store on iOS and Android devices. And while you download, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are free, so if you don't have them, what are you doing? They're free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, and Fire Sticks TV. Roku and Roku Sticks are also on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. And here we are on timeout with myself, Logan Lockhart, joined by a very special guest, someone who is around that team in Pennsylvania. No, not the Flyers, not the team that's getting that bye into the real playoffs, but that team, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who has to play the Montreal Canadiens. Penguins beat writer Josh Yohe. Hello, Josh. Thank you for coming. How are you?
Good, Logan. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have you on. We had Bob McElligott on a couple weeks ago, the radio play-by-play guy for the Jackets. And I want to go into a similar direction with you because I asked him, I said, well, what's the approach to Toronto? After such a layover, we haven't seen anyone been on the ice. When you heard that it's Montreal, okay, give me the reaction around Pittsburgh. This is a Montreal team who was 10 points out of a playoff spot. Initial reaction to Montreal.
I think that the reaction among the fan base was one of concern because we all know who Montreal's goaltender is. And I don't think the Canadiens are a very good team. I don't think most people think they're a very good team, but they've got that guy. And I don't think anybody would be shocked if Carey Price stole a game or two. He's obviously one of the most gifted goaltenders of his generation. So that got everyone's attention. And also the Penguins have never beaten the Canadiens in, I think, 3 playoff meetings. So there's fans always think about that stuff, even if it doesn't really matter if it happened 25 years ago. The fact is, it's been a team that has inflicted some pain on the Penguins in the postseason past. So I think initially there was a little bit of concern. I haven't necessarily sensed that in the organization. I think there's a lot of respect for the Canadiens for sure. And they played 3 pretty tight games this season as well. But I also think the Penguins know they're a better team. And I think they're pretty motivated. So I think for fans, it's kind of cool. It's 2 of the more glamorous franchises in the league right now. Sidney Crosby against the Canadiens, a team he grew up cheering for. So, it makes it fun.
Right. Now, I find that interesting because I would think that maybe the mood would be, oh, this is a walk in the park. Because, Josh, the parity in the NHL, it's at another level compared to the other sports. You don't see a playoff series really with that much of a point gap. I believe it was about 15 points or something. Is that kind of something that's going through people's heads? Was it really Carey Price right away?
I think when you think of the Canadiens, he's the first guy you think of, right?
Right.
Because honestly, I don't want to say they're a no-name roster. They have a couple of guys we all know, but they don't have a flashy roster with talent. They don't have Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Gensel like the Penguins do. But no, hockey fans are so conditioned to be afraid, I think. And in Pittsburgh, it's like some of the most famous playoff series have been ones that nobody ever thought the Penguins could lose. Like you go back to the early 90s when the Penguins won the Cup in 91 and 92. They were upset by the Islanders in the second round in 93. The Islanders were a sub-500 team. The Penguins, Mario was at the height of his power. They'd won 17 games in a row entering the playoffs. No one thought they were going to lose. So upsets happen. And I will also say this, Logan, the Penguins were not playing well right before the season stopped. They had lost, I think, 7 of 10.
Yeah.
They were really playing their worst hockey of the season. So some people still probably have that on their minds as well.
So let's get into that because the month of February for Pittsburgh ended terribly. They lost 6 in a row to end February. And of course, the suspension of the season came, not too far into March. So when the team went through that skid and through other difficult stretches throughout the year, did the conversation immediately turn to injuries?
It did. And, they were banged up all season. That was why the Penguins for most of the season were such of a great story. Crosby missed 2 months. Malkin missed October. Jake Gensel missed 2 months. And they still kept winning and winning. Then all of a sudden in February it hit. And in fact, it was against the Leafs. You might recall there was a game in Pittsburgh. The Penguins went up 5-0 against Toronto in February. They just looked, all the goals were highlight reel goals. Yeah. And Toronto came back. They scored a couple of goals to kind of make it a game. And then 2 nights later, the Penguins went to Toronto and got destroyed. And that's what started their losing streak. It was the worst hockey they've played probably in the Mike Sullivan era. Yes, they were banged up, but Crosby didn't look himself. Matt Murray has been kind of up and down all season. They played some really bad hockey, and it wasn't just that they played poorly with some of the teams they lost to. Not the Leafs. The Leafs are a pretty good team, but And they went to California and lost all 3 games in regulation against 3 really bad teams this season. They lost at home to the Buffalo Sabres. We've seen what a train wreck they are. So um, it was a really, really bad patch of hockey. I think they were starting to break out of it a little bit. But, I mean, I'd be lying to you if I told you there was no concern in the Penguins organization with how they looked during that stretch.
Yeah, they lost 4-0 to Toronto that game. It started that losing streak. And that game against Toronto at home, the one that was, I remember from a Toronto perspective, being in Toronto, I can tell you nothing went right for the Leafs about halfway for the first half of that game. I believe there was a power play the Leafs had, and then, someone came out of the box for Pittsburgh, and then it was a whole mess in front of Frederick Anderson. It was just a mess of a game. Toronto comes back, defeats the Penguins 4-0. And it's kind of the story of those two teams, a bit of inconsistency. Right. But
the Leafs had some interesting games in Pittsburgh this season. I believe they got their coach fired in Pittsburgh.
That's right. In November. It was, you know what? I thought those 2 games in Pittsburgh, both of them were carbon copies of each other. I mean, Toronto kind of played the same dull kind of game and Pittsburgh took advantage of it. But I want to know what a healthy Jake Guentzel means to this team. Give us the Pittsburgh perspective here.
To me, I didn't feel like the Penguins were a legitimate Stanley Cup contender in February, not with the way they were playing and not when you consider that Guentzel was out of the lineup. They were still a playoff team. They could have won a round perhaps, but they just didn't have that feel. To me, with Guentzel, they're a much different team. If anybody thinks he's a creation of Sidney Crosby, I beg to differ. I don't think he is at all. This guy scored 40 goals last season. He was on a 40-goal pace this season before he hurt his shoulder. Most goal scorers are a little streaky. He's not. He literally just scores a goal every other game. That's just who he is. And I think he's 7th or 8th in NHL history in goals per game in the playoffs. He scored 13 goals as a rookie in the 2017 Stanley Cup run. He is just, the word clutch is overused in professional sports, but he really is. And he's going to make Sidney Crosby better too. Sid is so comfortable playing with him. I think one of the reasons Sid didn't quite look himself is because he didn't have his favorite winger with him.
Yeah.
So you consider you've got Jake Guentzel and Jason Zucker on the left side. The Penguins didn't think they would have those 2 in the top 6 until next season. So this is kind of a bonus for them with those 2 on the left, Crosby and Malkin down the middle, Brian Rust having a career year. That's a heck of a top 6. And to me, Guentzel really changes everything for them. That they are just so much more dynamic offensively with him.
Yeah, it bothers me a bit when people throw out, the whole thing of, oh, well, he's playing with Crosby. Oh, well, he's playing with McDavid. He's playing with Tavares. Give some credit to the guy. I think you're right, Josh. I mean, Jake Guentzel, he's proven, and it's well documented in Pittsburgh, what he meant for that playoff run in 2017, right? I mean, we can't ignore that. But you mentioned Matt Murray. Okay, now the goaltending for me in Pittsburgh is fascinating this year. Okay, you got Jari, who's playing quite well.
Yes.
And he played quite a bit of games. Okay, this is not a guy who kind of got a cup of coffee. He played quite a bit. Matt Murray, bit of a decline. Okay, he's, statistically one of his worst seasons. I don't want to call it a worst season, but, one of the weaker ones. What's the goaltending conversation in Pittsburgh? I mean, Jari has better numbers, but this is Matt Murray we're talking about, right?
He does. Yeah, I was just on the phone with Mike Sullivan yesterday, in fact, and we talked about this very subject. I certainly sense Matt Murray is going to be the guy when the playoffs start against Montreal. He's got 2 rings. He's just always kind of been that guy. That said, I think the leash is going to be really short on him. He did not have a good season. His save percentage was .899. And the Penguins were actually pretty good defensively in front of him. They were much better defensively this season than last. Tristan Jarry, it's not an accident that he was in the All-Star game. He earned it. He's been terrific all season. He was a 2nd-round pick, so he has a pedigree. Won the Memorial Cup in Edmonton, and I think it was 2014. Kind of a late bloomer, but he's really talented. And boy, the defensemen love playing with him because of the way he handles the puck. So Murray's going to be the guy, I'm pretty sure. But I'm telling you, if he has a bad game or 2, if Montreal goes up in that series, do not be surprised if you see Tristan Jarry. And I will also add, Jim Rutherford told me last month that it's going to be really hard to keep both of them past this season. They're both restricted free agents. I have a feeling this is Matt Murray's last season in Pittsburgh. I don't want to say that for sure because you never, ever know. But don't be shocked if Matt Murray is traded in the offseason. If the salary cap's going to drop as much as everyone fears that it will because of what's happened in the world the last few months, man, it's going to be really, really hard to keep both.
Really? So what's the game plan then in the crease for Pittsburgh going forward? I mean, if you don't think Murray is going to return beyond this season or next season, whatever it may be, what's the game plan? Is there anyone that's coming up?
They really like Jari for one. I mean, I do think they believe he can be the guy moving forward. And also, Casey DeSmith was the backup last season and a good one. There just wasn't room for him this year, so he's back in the American Hockey League in Wilkes-Barre. They love him as a backup goalie. He's not a number one goalie, but he's a perfectly solid backup. And that doesn't mean Murray won't be here long term. It's conceivable, but the fact is he's going to want a really big contract. He might want something in the neighborhood of $7 or $8 million a year. And listen, he's just turned 26 years old and he's got 2 Stanley Cup rings. So
he should ask for it. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got that ammunition. Now, you can also say 2 of the last 3 regular seasons, his numbers have been below average, and they have.
Yeah.
He's not a great regular season goaltender. He gets hurt a lot. So his contract to me is fascinating. You can make so many arguments pro or con Murray in terms of giving him a huge deal. But I will tell you this, just from a philosophical standpoint, the Penguins organization, they're not huge on giving goaltenders an enormous amount of money. They would never do what Montreal did with Price or what the Rangers did with Lundqvist. They don't want a goaltender taking up that much of their salary cap, especially when you've already got Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Gensel making as much money as they do. So you could get Jari for a lot cheaper the next couple of years, and I wouldn't be shocked if they go down that route.
Interesting. I find that fascinating. So what I'm going to take from that is that Sullivan would not hesitate to put Jari in that series if things start going downhill. Is that right?
I don't think he would. It's funny because Murray has always been his guy. You'll remember in 2017, Marc-Andre Fleury played out of his mind when they beat Columbus and the Capitals in the first 2 rounds. He had one bad game against Ottawa. It was game 3 of the conference final. Matt Murray was back in the crease. Sullivan always wants Murray to be the guy.
Right.
So there's a loyalty. Hey, you won him 2 cups. Mm-hmm. So there's a loyalty there. I do think he will start the postseason, but I also feel like the Penguins don't have quite the confidence in Murray that they did a couple of years ago. I watch him play every game. I don't just look at the numbers. He just doesn't look like the same goaltender. He gives up bad goals now. He never used to. He just, for whatever reason, he doesn't look quite as athletic as he did. Maybe it's a confidence thing. So I think Matt's a really good goalie. He's a number one goaltender in the NHL. There's no doubt about it. But I don't know if he's the guy of the future the way we all kind of assumed he was when Marc-Andre Fleury was let go. But I will say this. What if Murray wins the cup this year? What if they get hot and they win the cup? Then you have a goalie who's won 3 in his first 5 years. Then you have to keep him, right? I would think. But
3 in 5 years. I mean, we're talking Hall of Fame. No, I mean, you look at that. Yeah.
So how can you not? I mean, yeah, but then again, if he does do that, then what does his price become? And can they even afford him?
No. I mean, and if you're saying that as an organization, they would never do what New York or Montreal did. Well, they might just say, see you later. Thank you for what you did, but we can't pay you.
Well, and if they do that, his value would be so high, you could get a boatload in a trade for him too. And,
right.
Their system could certainly use it replenished a little bit when you draft as low as they often do and trade your first round picks as they often do. Your system's going to take a hit, and it has. So, boy, it's going to be a fascinating offseason. I hate not focusing on the playoffs because that's what matters, but I know how hockey fans are. They love the offseason talk, right? And it's going to be a really short offseason, and a lot of wild things are going to happen. So, like around October and November is going to be a very interesting time for hockey fans and hockey executives.
They love off-season talk, and they love salary cap talk. That's the trend now. Everyone loves talking about the salary cap. Believe me, in Toronto, oh my goodness, I think for about 3 years we talked about the salary cap. Okay, trade deadline. It's hard to believe that prior to the suspension of the season, the trade deadline wasn't that long ago. Right. I mean, so Patrick Marleau, how did he fit in on this team? He played 8 games, a goal and an assist. All right. But how did you see him fitting in on this team going forward? And what did you see in those 8 games?
He looked okay to me. It's funny. I've only seen him play a handful of times in person in my life because we don't see the Western Conference often, just in the Stanley Cup final. I forgot what a big man he is.
Yeah.
Like, he's still big and has a presence about him. He can still skate too. The hands obviously aren't what they were at 30 or 20, at 40, but I liked what I saw. They did not get him to play with Crosby or Malkin. They've got Zucker and they've got Gensel back. Those are your top 2 left wings. He'll play on the third line, and that third line could be really interesting for the Penguins. We know who their top 2 I'll tell you right now, the hockey fans love line combos too. The top line, Crosby, Gensel, and Connor Sherry, who they love playing with. You got Brian Rest, Malkin, and Zucker, which is a great second line. And their fourth line was one of the best in hockey this season. Zach Aston-Reese, Teddy Bluger, and Brandon Tanev, who was sensational. That's a really good fourth line. So who does that leave left for the third line? Well, you got Patrick Hornquist on the right side, still a very good player. You got Patrick Marleau on the left side, and you're going to get Jared McCann in the middle. Those are three good hockey players, but they're also three hockey players who have never played together before. So that line will be interesting.
And you mentioned Sheary, and I was thinking about this today. I'm going, first of all, they must love Sheary in Pittsburgh, of course, right? He's got to be one of these heroes, part of the Cup teams. How important, really? Let's talk on the ice here. How important is Connor Sheary to bring him back in Pittsburgh?
Well, he is married to Mike Sullivan's niece, so there might be some of that involved as well.
Is that right?
Yeah, he is. Boston guys, Connor Sheary, he's so streaky. He's like a pinch hitter in baseball, who like really good pinch hitter, and then when you put him in the lineup every game, he's not that good. He'll go on these runs for a week or two where he puts up big numbers. Crosby loves playing with him because Sid wants to play with fast players. I don't even think Sid cares if your hands are that good. He just wants to play with speed. He loves playing with fast guys. Sheary knows how to play with him. But when he goes into one of his slumps, he's one of those guys, if he's not scoring, he's not helping you. He doesn't really draw penalties. He doesn't kill penalties. So do I think he'll be on that line all the time? No. I think he will start with Crosby and Gensel. If he goes into a slump, they'll just take him out of the lineup because he's not really going to help them in the bottom six all that much. You could still see Patrick Hornquist up there at times. Crosby doesn't always like playing with Hornquist because he's not fast. But he's also great down low, and Crosby's probably still the best player in the world down low, so they complement each other well. Mike Sullivan likes those two together, I can tell you that. Yeah. But no, Sheary, he's just kind of an instant offense guy from time to time, and he just knows how to play with Sid. He knows how to play in Sullivan's system. So that I think he's more valuable in Pittsburgh than he would have been other places.
Where do you see the Penguins' window closing here? I mean, of course, Stanley Cups in 16 and 17, but then you get swept by the Islanders last year. And that's still got to be in the back of fans' minds for sure, players' minds possibly. But, when you see teams like the Rangers and the Islanders and, of course, the Capitals, all in the same division there, do you think the Penguins' window, it's kind of coming to an end soon, or does this have an opportunity to extend at some point?
Well, it's going to close at some point, and they play in the best division in the sport right now, too. Mm-hmm. A lot of these teams aren't going away anytime soon, I don't think. That said, a couple of things. Crosby, to me, and maybe McDavid's the best player in the league right now. That's the numbers probably say that, but Sid's still right there to me with McDavid or McKinnon. I mean, he's right in the conversation. I still think if you wanted one guy to win a playoff series, he's probably the guy. And so as long as he can operate at that level, I still see them as a threat, not just because of his greatness, but also Jim Rutherford has made the Penguins a lot better and a lot younger in the last couple of years. There's this perception that the Penguins are an old team. They're really not. Their best players are in their 30s, yes, and that's an issue. But in the last year, Rutherford's brought in Jared McCann, who's 23, this 22-year-old defenseman, John Marino, who is unbelievable. I mean, we don't talk about him because Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes understand. But if you get a chance to watch the Penguins, watch number 6, John Marino. He is going to be a great defenseman in this league. He's still a kid. So really everywhere else in the lineup other than Crosby, Malkin, and Marleau and Hornquist and Letang, they're in their 20s. So I still think they can be really good for a couple of more years. The biggest thing is the goaltending and figuring out, do you commit to Matt Murray long-term? Is Tristan Jarry the guy? If Jarry is the guy, just how good is he? It's a cliche, but it's always about goaltending. But I still think they can be a contender for at least a couple of more years. Their biggest problem really is just the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference is so good. I really think 7 or 8 of the best 10 teams in the league are in the East right now. You got St. Louis and Colorado. Other than them, the East is just loaded. So the Penguins could play well and still lose in the first round because they're going to get Boston or Washington or Tampa or Philly. So That's the biggest roadblock for them. But you know what, though, if I'm those teams, I don't really want to play the Penguins either. I still think they're capable of a couple of more runs.
Now, are you still thinking about that Islanders series? I mean, what happened there and what has changed since then to avoid something like that?
Yeah, they looked dead in the water in that series. Didn't look like the Penguins. they're a better team now. They made some changes. Their bottom six is a lot better. Brandon Tanev is a guy. A lot of people thought Jim Rutherford overpaid for him. Maybe he did, but he's a really good player. I mean, just the speed that he has brought to the lineup. They've gotten back to being a fast team. Mm-hmm. And I will also say, because I know you have people listening to this that are from Toronto, a certain guy named Phil Kessel isn't here anymore. And I am not a Phil Kessel basher. He was great in Pittsburgh. He did the job. They don't win those 2 cups without him. But his relationship with Mike Sullivan was not good. Really? It had become a problem. I think there were just issues. He can be a little contagious. And in my opinion, do they work harder this year? Are they a more diligent defensive team? Yes. And do I blame him for all of that? No. But he wasn't helping. And if you look at his numbers, he is not the same even strength player that he was a couple of years ago. So they miss him on the power play, but otherwise I don't think they miss him at all.
Interesting. So the subtraction of Kessel, you're saying, is a big plus. And nothing against Phil Kessel, but it's just what it is, right? The relationship of Sullivan and the decline in the numbers. So yes, I think you got a point there about how, yes, the team's better, right? Because a lot of people would say, oh, you get rid of Phil Kessel. Look how big he was. He should have won the Conn Smythe, right? That's what people would say. But you're making the case they are a better team, and that Islander series is history. You would agree?
Yeah, and they're a better 5-on-5 team without him because, I mean, you look at his numbers the last 2 years. He has not been a good 5-on-5 player. He's a power play magician still, and the power play was worse this year because he was gone, no doubt. And I hate to blame Phil for everything, but he just has a way about him. Is great. He might be a Hall of Famer. As great of a player as he is, there's a reason he's on his 4th team. I mean, he drives coaches nuts. He becomes an issue at times. He just has a lot of bad habits, as great as he is. Right. But yeah, I think Jim Rutherford had a really good summer. I think he's made this team faster, and that was the biggest thing. When they won the Cup in 16 and 17, especially 16, they were just faster than everyone. You just couldn't keep up. You had Carl Hagelin on one line, and Kessel and Brian Rust and Crosby. These guys could all fly. They got away from that a little bit, and you can see them this year getting back to that speed game. They're not going to out-physical people. That's not how they're built to win. They can't win that way. If they try to do that against the Capitals or Bruins, they have no chance. They might be able to outskate them, though.
Josh Yohe, Penguins beat writer. Do you like doing predictions or no?
I don't mind predictions at all.
Penguins, Canadians, best of 5. Who you got?
I'll take the Penguins in 4. I'll say Price might steal 1, but the Penguins are a really motivated team. Mike Sullivan told me yesterday. He said Sidney Crosby said this summer playoff tournament has his attention. Those were his words. When I hear that, I don't bet against him.
When I hear that, I definitely wake up when Sidney Crosby says that. Josh Yohe, thank you so much. Penguins beat writer. Do you have any last words? How can people find you? A lot of people in Toronto listening. How can they find you?
Just come to the Athletics website. That's the best thing. I work for the Pittsburgh branch, but the whole website's great. Or you can look me up on Twitter. We'll have some friendly banter, and I hope everyone north of the border is staying safe and healthy. And I miss being in Canada. My kids are there. In fact, I haven't seen them in 3.5 months. They're in Kingston, so I can't wait to cross the border, I assure you. And hopefully we get playoff hockey soon. I can't wait. Josh Yohe, thank you so much. Stay safe in Pittsburgh, and we hope to do this soon. You got it, buddy. Anytime. See ya. So there you go. A lot of interesting stuff there from Josh. I got to say, when I asked him about Matt Murray, I was going in one direction, saying, well, Tristan Jarry has played fantastic. And to hear him when he spoke to Sullivan about Murray, it's a problem. It really is a real conversation in Pittsburgh right now. And when they're playing Montreal, I mean, you got 2 ends of the spectrum here. You got one team with a bit of goaltender confusion and the direction that they're going. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you got Carey Price. And that's the first name that came out of Josh's mouth when I asked him about the Montreal Canadiens. He said, well, it's Carey Price, and I was expecting one of 2 answers. I was expecting either him to say that the fan base in Pittsburgh right now thinks that this is going to be a walk in the park. And he didn't say that. In fact, he said that the first thing that came to a lot of people's head was concern, right? When you have Carey Price on the other side, how can you not really acknowledge that, right? So there's Josh Yohe. Thank you so much to Josh for coming on. And now we go from Pittsburgh to Buffalo, New York, Western New York. Ted Goldberg,
Hello, Ted.
Hey, how you doing? I didn't realize you were going to have me on this quickly. I still getting set up over here, but as you can see, my sparsely populated apartment. But good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, no problem. I'm happy you're here. So here's the thing with the Sabres, right, Ted? A lot of different things going on. Yesterday was a busy day. Tell me about your day yesterday. When did you hear this news that Botterill is out?
So yesterday was interesting because I was kind of, I was working on a different story about high school football coaches and how they were kind of getting ready for the season, because I figure, Sabres season isn't, terribly busy at the moment. We were kind of in off-season mode. And then all of a sudden I find out, sitting on my couch while I'm having my coffee, that Jason Botterill had been dismissed as general manager of the Sabres. And at this point, it was a big surprise for Sabres fans. It was a big surprise for basically anyone who's covering the team or anyone who pays attention to the team, because you may recall 3 weeks ago, Kim Pegula, the president of this team and the co-owner of the Sabres, said that he was safe.
Right.
They said Jason was safe. I mean, it was just incredible to see that in 3 weeks, she goes from saying this guy is safe as the general manager of the Sabres after 3 years to a difference in philosophies, philosophical differences, as being the reason that he was shown the door after just 3 years as the general manager of this team.
Ted Goldberg, Spectrum News, Sabres reporter. So here's where I want to go with this. We can talk about the firing all day, but is the public displeasure, we hear it almost every year now in Buffalo, whether it's, most notably Jack Eichel, but even guys like Skinner, Okposo, Ristolainen, is this tiring? It's got to be tiring for not only the fan base, but someone like you who's writing about the team. How tiring is this?
It's interesting because, a lot of people talk about, Sabres are, small market team, this and that. And the players, most of them, I would say, actually, all of them are smart enough that they're not going to say in an interview how annoying it is and how tiring it is to talk about losing day in and day out. When we were doing our season-ending interviews with Rasmus Ristolainen, he spoke about how this team, there kind of needs to be a rebuilding. And it seems like Ristolainen has been the center of trade rumors every year for each of the last, 7 years now. And he's admitted that it's like that he's heard these trade rumors almost every single year. And, like I said, these players are not going to come out and say, we're tired of talking about this. It's awful, because the last time a player gave us a brutally honest interview, Ryan O'Reilly, at Locker Cleanout a couple of years ago, we saw what happened with him. We saw how much longer he was a member of this team. And then now, of course, he gets traded away, wins a Selke, wins a Stanley Cup. Good things happen to him. But, Jack Eichel gave us pretty honest answer not long ago. He said he was sick of losing. And that was one of the few things that occurred over the last 3 weeks that maybe that's what made Kim Pegula change her mind about Jason Botterill. You don't know. But for sure, these players, you have to be really competitive to get to the NHL in the first place. And none of these guys are going to say, I don't want to be on the Sabres, obviously. But that, they're all thinking that. They're all sick and tired of this team being a cellar dweller every season.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ristolainen, and he's a guy I think about all the time. Is a move for Ristolainen out of Buffalo inevitable at this point?
It's funny, 2.5 years ago, I would have said yes. There's only so many contracts on this team that extend past the next couple of years. It's funny because this team does have a lot of cap space, although there are a lot of restricted free agents. So, there's like 7 or 8 of those that Kevin Adams is going to have to deal with over the next, few months. But in terms of contracts that are on this team, Kyle Okposo has 3 more years, but he's almost untradeable because of how much money he makes and his injury history. Maybe Seattle takes him in the expansion draft. Maybe you dangle a draft pick to get his contract out of town. But Jack Eichel is not going anywhere.
No.
Sam Ryan is a good player, and he's going to be a free agent. But you think maybe they give him, a longer term deal. But you're not trading Rasmus Dahlin. That's lunacy. Not an option. Henry Jokiharju, why would you trade him? He's a good young player with not that much term. But in terms of like long-term contracts, Jeff Skinner has 1,000 years left on his deal. And he, aside from this year, he's got a proven track record of scoring goals. And that's something this team has really struggled with. So part of me thinks, you kind of have to trade Ristolainen, but Colin Miller still has some trade value despite the healthy scratches this year. Brandon Montour, teams like him, teams are kind of split on him. Some teams like him. Some of the underlying analytics were not very friendly to him this year. But maybe he can be dealt. There are options there, but I would imagine now that Jason Botchwell is gone, maybe Kevin Adams looks at Ristolainen and says, "Okay, we've been trying to trade this guy for years. This time now we pull the trigger."
So you mentioned Sam Reinhart, and this is always intriguing when he got that bridge deal, right? And now we're at the point where it's expiring. Is there any concern about Reinhart with the deal expiring? Because we know it's a trend in sports now. With young players and teams, they struggle to come to an agreement. We see it in the NFL on a yearly basis, it seems now. So is there any concern about Sam Reinhart continuing being a Buffalo Sabre?
I would say there's a moderate to low amount of concern because, he took this deal a couple of years ago, really just betting on himself because it was only 2 years ago, 2 seasons ago, Sam Reinhart at the midway point through the season, people were looking at him saying, you know what, maybe he's not a future of this team. And then for the last two and a half years, he has really been a very solid player, mostly playing on Jack Eichel's line. And it's not exactly like those kind of wingers who have that kind of intelligence and that kind of smarts. They don't grow on trees.
Right.
You look at guys who are holding out in the NFL. Dalvin Cook and other running backs. Running backs are dime a dozen. It's much easier to find just an adequate running back from the scrap heap than it is to find a decent winger. The Sabres have tried a lot of different wings that have played alongside Jack Eichel. Some of them have worked. Jeff Skinner jumps out at me. Jason Pominville, who was out of the league this whole year, played a good amount on Jack Eichel's line last year and played well. But there have also been guys who have struggled. Jimmy Vesey, as good of a scorer as he was with the Rangers, he comes here and he played a little bit with Jack, but we didn't really see that much chemistry there. Tage Thompson, the centerpiece of the Ryan O'Reilly trade, he gets put on Jack Eichel's line and he was yanked off before the end of the second period, the first game that they were playing together. So I don't think there's that much concern. I don't imagine the Sabres would be silly enough to let Sam Reinhart walk, but I'm not going to say it's 100%. He did hold out 2 years ago. He missed part of training camp in order to get that bridge deal and bet on himself. But now, considering how well he played over the last couple of years, you would imagine at the very least he'll get, and then again, he could take another bridge deal. He could take another arbitration. He could go to arbitration this year and then next year. And then once we have more certainty with the cap, maybe he wants to become a UFA again in 2 years and really break the bank.
Would you think that he would be in favor of doing that again? Ted, I think about the big time money that this team has given away on the wing, right? Okposo, just as an example. And do you think that Reinhart would kind of go along with that whole narrative of, okay, fine, I'll help you guys out for a couple more years? Or maybe he'll just say, you know what? No, I want my long-term deal now.
That depends what Sam Reinhart wants. Obviously it's the whole security versus betting on yourself thing. I don't know if you saw The Last Dance, but Scottie Pippen infamously took the security and it ended up being an awful contract a few years in because he was such an elite player making an absolute pittance on that team. Sam Reinhart I would imagine he wants to make the most amount of money because that's what everybody wants in the NHL. His agent wants him obviously to make the most amount of money so he can get that sweet commission. So I'm not sure the Sabres are going to offer him a crazy amount of money, a crazy long-term extension this year. I think it's entirely possible that he says, no, I'm going to arbitration this year and next year, and then I'm going to make a crazy amount of money. Now, he is betting on himself because what if he takes that arbitration this year and maybe Ralph Kruger doesn't play him with Jack Eichel that much next season? Maybe he only gives you 45, 50 points, in which case he's going to be kind of crazy if he's asking for $8-9 million a year. I would imagine it's probably in his best interest if he knows he's going to play with Jack a lot next year, which obviously we don't even know what's going to happen with next year. But like you said, there's a very good chance that he just bets on himself again for one more year, maybe 2 more years. And then once we have more finality of what we know the cap is going to be, he's just going to command a lot of money.
What's the situation in Buffalo right now? Because I would assume there's a lot of excitement with the Bills, right? There's got to be so much excitement going on around that team and what's going on in the AFC East and how the Bills performed last year. Are the Sabres kind of getting lost in the shuffle here? Because it's becoming the same old song and dance with the Sabres now. This team hasn't been in the playoffs since 2011. Give me kind of the, if we had a spectrum of Buffalo sports right now, where do the Sabres fall? Where do the Bills fall? Where are people really thinking? Obviously, it's the Bills, but are the Sabres getting lost in everything here?
I don't know if I would quite go that far. Obviously, UB basketball has actually become much more popular over the last few years, making the tournament. UB football, winning their first bowl game last year. I still would say the Sabres are the second best team in town. I would just say that gap between them and the Bills for number one has become a chasm, just because this team over the last, it was Darcy Regier 7 years ago who said, it may require some suffering. That was 7 years ago. And like, how much has changed since then? It's still been, a lot of seasons in a row of suffering. And as hapless as the Bills looked, for a long time, I mean, their playoff drought was almost 2 decades. And we saw how ridiculous things got with Doug Whaley and Rex Ryan, and just how much of a grease fire that team had become. And you see what happens when the Bills get a little bit of consistency. They bring in Sean McDermott. They get Brandon Beane, the general manager, a little bit later. They get a couple of solid drafts. And then all of a sudden, you look at this team, they've made the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 years. They have a really solid defense. They've got a quarterback on a rookie contract. I mean, who's to say the Bills can't be the favorite for the AFC East next year? I mean, you look at the teams, and the Dolphins, we'll see how many strides they make with a rookie quarterback and a couple splashy signings. But who knows what we're going to see out of the Patriots? I mean, how much fear does Jarrett Stidham strike in your heart? Like, a little bit maybe, but like, it's more just Bill Belichick is just terrifying, because obviously he knows what he's doing. That team won 11 games when, Brady tore his ACL in 2008. So, I mean, they can kind of win without him. But to go, going back to your question, this is a Bills town. This is a football town for sure.
Right.
And, the Bills are in the playoffs. It's all we talk about. When the Bills lose, it's still all we talk about. I mean, I'll put it this way. We do a live post-game show on Spectrum News every Sunday night after the Bills play. And obviously our ratings are much better when they win compared to when they lose. The week of the Thanksgiving game in Dallas, when they beat the Cowboys in Jerry World, we still had our live show. We had our post-game show on Sunday for a Thanksgiving game, and we still had great ratings. And that was days afterwards, when you would think people would be on to the next week. But people in this market talk about the Bills all the time. It is the biggest thing going on. Now, sometimes it gets supplanted in the news cycle, like if, I don't know, Jack Eichel gets named captain. Obviously, that's a tremendous story. Jason Botterill gets fired. Ralph Kruger gets brought on board. All of the bloodletting we saw across the organization yesterday, they really stole the news cycle from the Bills. But that's what the Sabres have to do, really, to keep their relevance sometimes.
So, you would think that a shakeup has to be coming up the Sabres, like a major one. I mean, you can't, what's the definition of insanity, Ted? Right? We all know what it is. Okay. And it just seems like the Sabres, it's the same old, okay, well, the core's good. You got Eichel, you got Dahlin. Let's give it one more kick at the can. And you got to think that a shakeup is coming. Ristolainen, right? That's got to be the first domino to fall, you would think, right? Let's go through it. Ristolainen?
You would, I mean, like I said, you would think, I mean, considering I feel like this team had 12 NHL caliber defensemen last year, and they didn't trade. They waited a really long time to trade Marco Scandella, and even that blew up in their face because they gave him up for a fourth, and then he gets flipped for a second round pick not that long after. But then we see Lawrence Pilot, it looked like some of his underlying stats made it seem like, okay, he could be a third pairing defenseman in the NHL, and he leaves for the KHL. Mm-hmm. And then Zach Bogosian gets they essentially bought him out. I mean, he leaves, and it's like he gets turned into nothing, and like it's just very confusing what this team is doing with at least last year it was confusing what they were doing with their defense. You would think, though, Rasmus Ristolainen has some value.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, but, I just look at this team right now. They've attempted to put veterans around Eichel, right? I mean, and then Wayne Simmons comes in, and then Michael Froley comes in. And now these are guys, do you think that there should be any consideration for Kevin Adams to just bring these guys back just for the sake of veteran presence?
I think Wayne Simmons commands a little bit more attention in that locker room than maybe Michael Frolik does. And that's nothing against Frolik. I mean, I know he's a little long in the tooth. And while him and Wayne Simmons are both UFAs, I think Frolik, he hasn't been here for very long, obviously. And, neither are Simmons. Both kind of came over in the last few months. But, a lot of players have a lot of respect for Wayne Simmons. And he's still, he has a nose for a net. He can crash the net on the power play. I mean, I still think he still has I think he could play a role on this team, fourth line minutes moving forward. I think maybe he brings a little more physicality than you could see out of Michael Frolik. And this is a team that has a lot of bottom six pieces. So I'm not quite sure how Frolik, I suppose, could fit in next year. But then again, maybe Kevin Adams is in love with him. I don't know. He's only been the general manager of this team for a little more than a day now.
Now, tell me about Kevin Adams here. Now, he was the VP of Business Administration or Finance.
Yes.
Is that correct? Now, exactly why was he named the general manager here? What do you think the thinking was around this? I mean, this is someone with a lack of experience, someone that the fan base is probably wondering, who is he and what has he done for me in the past, even though he's been part of the organization. Take me through the decision. Why do you think that Kevin Adams was the guy here?
So this was a bit of a surprising hire for a few reasons, because first off, like I said earlier, this was an absolute bloodletting yesterday. They let go scouts. They let go the coaches in the minor league system. They let go all of these, regional scouts. They let go of all these guys. And then they name as their general manager someone who is still in the organization and who has been here for years. He's been here since, uninterrupted since 2011.
Yeah.
So he's here for 9 years. And it's like, okay, well, he obviously has business experience, and he runs youth programs in the city. He is very involved with the Harbor Center in downtown Buffalo. But the sense that we got from Kim Pegula and Terry Pegula speaking with them on the conference call yesterday was that communication is really something that has been lacking between ownership and the general managers over the last few years, going back to Tim Murray, going back to, I guess, Darcy Regier. And it seems like they're very good at communicating with Kevin Adams, and they really know Kevin Adams. He's a very known quantity, which is, kind of weird rationale, especially for a guy who, there were some mistaken tweets fairly early on that said, oh, he's the interim GM. And the Sabres clarified, no, he's not the interim GM. This guy is the GM.
The GM, yeah.
Yeah, and he, like you said, he does not have a ton of front office experience. And if they were going to give him some experience around him with assistant general managers, Randy Sexton was fired, and so was Steve Greeley. So he is now going to be kind of on his own. And it's like, okay, he, communicates well with the Pegulas. He's a known commodity. They know him very well. From a hockey side of things, he's kind of a mystery. I mean, obviously, philosophically, he's more inclined to agree with the Pegulas. They mentioned that was the big reason why Jason Botterill was dismissed. But he wasn't going to get into X's and O's and analytics with us yesterday. I know earlier today on WGR radio station in Buffalo, he mentioned how he wants the Amherst to be more concerned with player development than winning, which is an interesting thing to hear about because, the Amherst have been, I don't want to say the crown jewel of the Sabres minor league system, but the last few years, they've been a solid team. They went to the playoffs each of the last 2 years, first round sweeps each time, but, they got to the playoffs and maybe there wasn't enough player development going on. Victor Olofsson came out of there. Obviously he played in the SHL for a long time, but he was in Rochester for 1 year. He comes up to Buffalo this year, former 7th round pick, and he's an absolute weapon on the power play. And he played pretty well with Jack Eichel most of the time. The defense is still coming there, but you would think that's evidence that there was player development going on in Rochester, but maybe not enough.
So I know they didn't get into the X's and O's, but did the Pegulas get into any specifics about the communication point? I find that very interesting. I mean, there was a lack of communication. I mean, what exactly does that mean? I mean, they weren't happy with how he was communicating his plan or his vision about this team to them?
Well, this is what we were very curious about because what happened with their communication in the last 3 weeks, that was so different. I mean, 3 weeks ago, it was, we're going, full guns a-blazing with Jason Botterill, and we believe in, his strategy for the future. And yeah, the whole thing is just very strange. I mean, clearly there was some breakdown in terms of just how they view the future of this team. And I wonder if the scouting department has something to do with it. I mean, they fired all of these guys, and maybe Jason Botterill wanted to keep all of these guys. Maybe the Sabres are going to go back to the days of video scouting and, really relying on video of guys and not scouts physically watching hockey games, which you can see some of the Sabres draft results from the mid 2000s, how that panned out. But yeah, it's, we didn't get a lot of explanation about it. It was just the communication between Jason Botterill and ownership was not to the level that ownership wanted it to be. And things either got lost in translation or there were messages that were not received by either side. And something happened in the last 3 weeks to make Kim Pegula specifically turn face.
Well, what could have happened in the last 3 weeks? I mean, nothing's going on. I mean, there's no hockey. The offseason hasn't even started. I mean, what could have happened in the last 3 weeks? I find this very curious. I agree with you guys. You guys were curious about it too. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting here reading about this stuff going, what could have happened in the last 3 weeks? So I guess we have to be the ones who kind of just look at the team. Maybe something clicked. I compared it yesterday when I was talking about the Pakulas putting the stamp of approval on their general manager, and then 3 weeks later firing him. I compared it to Rob Manfred, last week. Baseball's happening, and then here we are this week. Well, not too sure. In fact, but if you read the breaking news, maybe there are a little developments about Major League Baseball. But you know what? I find it compelling how in the last 3 weeks, when nothing's going on, something happened. But you said they cleaned house, right? The scouts are gone. Okay, guys are out of this organization now. So what can the Sabres do to show their fan base that things are really different this time?
Oh boy, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I think it's going to depend on who they hire in Rochester. I think that will help because people did notice just how much improvement there was in Rochester, because it seemed like under the previous regime, not Jason Botterill, but the folks before him, that there wasn't really that much of a care about what was going on in Rochester. You were trading draft picks for players. You were trading a first-round pick for Robin Leonard. You were going all in, accelerating the rebuild, and I guess the Sabres are still paying for that. But what the Sabres can do is they can surround Kevin Adams with veterans. They can surround him with people who know what they are doing. Not maybe salary cap gurus, maybe like really well-renowned scouts, hockey minds, you could say, because this is Kevin Adams' first go around as general manager, and Jason Botterill had never been a general manager. So this is not the first time that the Pagulas have tried someone in this role who's never done it before. So Sabres fans, at least that I interact with on Twitter, they have some ideas, and some of them are very smart. Some of them are interesting, and some of them are, well, I'm not going to repeat them because they're not even worth the oxygen.
The opposite of smart.
Yeah, exactly. Some people have suggested maybe the Sabres should hire a president of hockey operations because Kim Pegula has that business background, but how much about hockey does she know? And, she's the president of a hockey team, but it's not like she has a ton of front office experience. And Terry Pegula flat out said that won't happen. He thinks the communication between him and the head coach and the general manager at this point, that's the key, at this point, is very good. And he does not think the president of hockey operations is something that they need to do or that they even want to do. So that upset a lot of fans right there. But again, getting back to your question, I would say it's as simple as surround Kevin Adams with veterans, put him in a place to succeed, bring in hockey minds to help this first-time GM before he, does something really silly and hands out a bad contract or makes some more bad trades.
Right. So the confidence has to start in the front office, and then through that, fans can say, okay, we have confidence, and now we're going to trust the product that they put on the ice. And, it reminds me a lot of, there's a direct line of communication between the general manager and ownership. It reminds me a lot of the Islanders. Remember back in the, Mike Milbury, Charles Wong, they had there was no president there. They had a direct line of communication. So is that really what the strategy here is with the Pagulas? Because when I think of the Pagulas, I think of the Bills. And I'm thinking, okay, what are they doing with the Bills? And how can I relate that to what they may do with the Sabres? Is that kind of the thinking in Buffalo? You kind of put hand in hand together?
Exactly. It's basically, it's like a weird thing. Like over the last 2-3 years, we've seen just how much cleanup there was with the Bills. And we saw, it took Brandon Beane a few years. You had to be patient. There was a lot of dead money on that team, a lot of bad contracts that they had to sift through. But after a few years, it's remarkable the turnaround that we've seen with the Bills and how they go from a team loaded with terrible contracts to now a team that has cap space and can contend. So, of course, the question is, how come ownership can do that with their football team, but not with the hockey team? It's a little bit strange. Obviously, there are allegations of the Pagulas. People say they meddle more with the hockey team. They kind of let the football team do their own thing, but they maybe force their way into hockey. There are folks who think that the Ryan O'Reilly signing bonus that was upcoming, $7.5 million a few years ago, that was the reason why they really wanted Jason Botterill to trade Ryan O'Reilly. So there's no leverage there. The return's not as good. And I don't know. It's a good question. Because, it's just funny how, their ownership with the Bills, no one really calls them meddlesome owners with the Bills, but with hockey, they've got their hands all over the place. Kim Pegula, like I said, she's the president of the Bills or of the Sabres, and there's no president of hockey operations, and they're just churning through general managers. And, it's, I don't know. It's
I
tough.
feel I feel for you. I can hear the pain in your voice almost, you know. I can see, but you know what? Someone once told me when it comes to writing, and I know you do a lot of writing, the worst team you can write about is a mediocre team. You either want to write about a team that's incredible, there's a lot to write about there, or a team that's almost in this situation when there's front office drama, there's ownership concerns, there's this and that, there's, you know, shakeups about to happen. You either want one of those. You don't want to be in the middle. You don't want to be a team who's on the fringe of the playoffs every year. That's what I'm saying in terms of a journalist, right?
The good news for the Sabres that they're hardly on the fringe of being in the playoffs.
Exactly. And that's the other thing. I mean, by February, they've just been out of it. And Jack Eichel, he's entering his 6th year, Ted. 6 years. It's hard to believe. And he hasn't seen a lick of the playoffs.
He has not even been close. I mean, I've covered this team full time for 3 years now. So my first year coincided with Phil Housley's first year. And that year was obviously a train wreck. That was Jason Bottrell's first year, and they were out of it by Christmas. And I went to the Winter Classic, and that was awesome. But the deadline at the drama at the trade deadline, I can speak, was, okay, where's Evander Kane going to go? Right. Can they trade Josh Georges for a 7th round pick? Like, okay, great. That's not super exciting. And then last year, my second year, they actually started out pretty good. They had the 10-game winning streak and Jeff Skinner scoring lots of goals, and they just totally flamed out right after the trade deadline. They pick up Brandon Montour. People are excited, but then they go right into the freaking lottery. It's incredible because, again, they were on the fringe of the playoffs, and then within a 30, 40-game span, they completely sputtered. And then this past year, they were like fringy-ish, then the trade deadline, and then they just kind of stunk. They lost a lot of games in a row, so...
They get off to good starts, Buffalo. They start off well, and then it all kind of falls apart, right? I mean, what happened? Like the penalty kill, the only penalty kill that was worse than the Sabres this year was Detroit. Okay, and that's not good. Okay, and so the Sabres, what was the mood? What was the expectation? Of course, it's playoffs, but the realistic expectation amongst the fan base heading into 2019-20, what was it? I mean, realistically.
It was the same expectation I have had. It's now each of the last 3 years where I tell my friends, my family, if things break well for this team, 7 or 8 seed, baby. Wild card. Because it's not like you look at this roster and it's, the first and second line, you've got some pretty high end talent there. I mean, Jack Eichel's a really good player and Sam Reinhart's a good player. And, Jeff Skinner, obviously, he can score a lot of goals, and Victor Olofsson had high expectations, but he's been very solid as well. So you've got 4 or 5 like pretty solid players. And then even in like the bottom 6, it's like, oh, well, what's Jimmy Vesey going to do this year? Maybe he'll score a bunch of goals. And then not a lot of people saw this coming, but Zemgus Girgensons, Johan Larsson, and Kyle Oposo were quietly one of the better lines in hockey this past year. I mean, the advanced analytics had them as one of the best 4th lines in all of the NHL. So you had all right goaltending. I mean, Carter Hutton was below average the entire year, and he recently spoke with Buffalo News about how he had a vision problem this year, which might explain some things.
Well,
but Linus Ullmark was solid, and then he gets hurt, and then they're leaning on AHL depth and a guy who had a vision problem this year for goaltending, so that was a big issue. But you look at this roster, and then even the defense this year, you had some pretty good names there, and it's just things have to break. What the problem is, you look at this roster and you think to yourself, things must break well for this team to get to the wild card. You need to get bottom 6 scoring, which you didn't have. Maybe we thought Marcus Johansson was going to fill in well at center. And I like him on the wing. I don't love him at center because this team has an absolute crater at second line center that they've been trying to fill since Ryan O'Reilly left.
Yeah.
Casey Cook, that's just not ready, which is not his fault. He's 21 years old.
Yeah.
Jack Eichel, obviously, is a great center. And Johan Larsson, 4th line center, has been solid, and Curtis Lazar has had some, depth minutes at center, 3rd and 4th line. He's been pretty good, but this team's just been, they just throw a lot of, square holes into round pegs, or round pegs, square holes. I'm not good with pegs or holes, but they've just had issues, with 2nd, 3rd line center, and it really has killed them the last couple of years.
It sounds like a mess. I wish everyone well, all the Sabres fans. At least the Bills are looking great, so that's great. Ted Goldberg, Spectrum News, Sabres reporter, writes everything, Western New York sports. Thank you so much. Tell the audience, we have a lot of people in Toronto listening and watching here on the BarnBurner TV Network and Zingo TV Channel 250. Tell everyone how they can find you, get a hold of you, look at any of your content.
So probably the best way you can find me, Ted Goldberg TV on Twitter, Ted Goldberg TV on Twitter is probably the best way to find me, or SpectrumLocalNews.com, because I'm not quite sure. You guys can see Spectrum News in Toronto. You might be able to. I'm not 100% sure, but our website is definitely there, and my Twitter is there. And look forward to hearing from you guys. If you think my tweets are awesome or stupid, reach out either way, and I'll try to hit you guys back. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, Ted. You were tremendous. Stay safe. Hope to do this soon.
I'll try, man. Talk to you later. Take care.
This show can also be heard on the BarnBurner Radio Network on its 122 platforms. Please check us out at barnburner.ca for all the news. BarnBurner, watch it, hear it, read it, download it. That's all for To Me on this Wednesday, June 17th edition of Timeout. What a fantastic edition it was. Thank you to Josh Yohe, Ted Goldberg, a little Penguins, a little Sabres talk. Had it all in there. Until tomorrow, I will be here for the Sports Wrap. I'm hearing that there might be some baseball news coming. Can we actually see a baseball season in 2020? We'll talk about it all. Until tomorrow, my name is Logan Lockhart, signing off.